Usually when you hear the word narcissist, your brain automatically pulls up a very specific, very loud image.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very cinematic image.
Yeah, exactly. You probably picture that like chest-puffing exhibitionist holding court at a dinner party, just completely dominating every single conversation.
Right. The person who constantly name drops and talks over everyone.
Yes, the one who basically expects the world to just roll out a red carpet because they woke up that morning.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very visible, aggressive, undeniable type of toxicity.
It really is. You can see it coming from a mile away. The arrogance is entirely externalized and broadcast to everyone in the room.
Right, but then you step into the world of covert narcissism, and that crystal clear image just completely shatters.
It shatters because the presentation is entirely different.
Yeah, because what if the most destructive, deeply manipulative narcissist in your life is actually the quietest person in the room?
The one hiding in the corner?
Exactly. What if it's the person who constantly plays the self-deprecating victim, or the anxious introvert, or even the self-proclaimed empath who claims they just, feel the world's pain too deeply?
Which is a very common disguise, actually.
It is. So, okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to completely dismantle and decode the hidden psychological machinery of what the clinical world calls covert or vulnerable narcissism.
And we really have to strip it all the way down to the studs for this one.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Because to truly understand this psychological structure, we have to move way past those surface-level behaviors.
Right. We aren't just going to catalog what these individuals do to their partners or their families. We have to understand why they psychologically must do it to survive their own internal landscape.
Exactly. We are going to uncover the childhood trauma, the profound attachment wounds, and the completely unconscious defense mechanisms that make this personality tick.
We're basically looking at the engine under the hood.
We really are.
Yeah.
And to do that, we have an absolutely massive stack of sources to go through today.
A very heavy stack.
So heavy. We are pulling from clinical literature, psychiatric research, and some really deep psychoanalytic theories, including schema therapy and Margaret Mahler's groundbreaking work on separation individuation.
Which is fascinating stuff.
It really is. And we've also got investigative data on the neurobehavioral overlaps with conditions like ADHD and borderline personality disorder.
The comorbidity data there is incredibly revealing.
It changes everything. And perhaps most fascinating, we are pulling from raw, real-world debates from a Reddit community dedicated to narcissistic personality disorder, which is RNPD.
Getting that internal perspective is so rare.
It is. We are looking at how people with this actual diagnosis describe their own internal hidden experience. So where do we even begin with all this?
Well, it's a profound journey into the human psyche. And if we are going to accurately map the psychological machinery here, we really have to start by aggressively clearing up the terminology.
Yeah, because the sheer confusion surrounding this disorder is baked right into its name, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I mean, if you look at pop psychology, you will see the terms covert and vulnerable used completely interchangeably.
Like they mean the exact same thing.
Right, as if they are perfect synonyms. But clinically and experientially, they are pointing to two very different facets of the same phenomenon.
Okay, yes, and this is where that Reddit thread from RNPD becomes incredibly illuminating. You have actual individuals living with diagnosed NPD debating these exact labels.
And they make some incredibly astute observations about it.
They really do. There is a user in there who goes by the Invisible Monster who makes a brilliant point. They point out that covert and vulnerable are not synonymous at all.
No, they aren't. And distinguishing them is crucial.
Right, because covert describes the behavior. It describes how the person presents to the outside world. It means introverted, shy, passive, hidden.
Exactly. It's the behavioral mask.
But vulnerable describes the internal state. It describes a psyche that is incredibly fragile, completely driven by toxic shame, and just easily wounded by the slightest breeze of reality.
What's fascinating here is that grasping this distinction unlocks the first major illusion of covert narcissism.
Which illusion is that?
Well, popular media often portrays the covert narcissist as a completely different species from the grandiose, loud narcissist we talked about earlier.
Right, like they are two entirely different disorders.
Exactly. But the clinical literature, particularly the research utilizing the pathological narcissism inventory, shows us definitively that they share the exact same core psychological architecture.
Wow. So underneath, it's the exact same engine.
The exact same. The intense entitlement, the severely impaired empathy, and the desperate, literal life-or-death need for external validation are all identical.
So the only difference is the disguise they wear to secure those things.
Precisely. The core drive is the same, but the strategy is entirely different.
And what a sophisticated disguise it is. Going through these sources, one of the most counterintuitive, almost mind-bending findings is how covert narcissists often disguise their ruthless pursuit of status as altruism.
Yes, the altruism defense. It's incredibly effective.
It's wild. They will frequently self-identify as an empath. You see this mentioned by a user in the Reddit thread, and clinical researchers note it constantly.
They absolutely love that label.
They do. They claim to be hypersensitive to the emotions of everyone around them. They claim they're just too caring for this cruel world. But reading the psychology behind it, it's not actual empathy, is it?
No, it is the exact opposite of empathy. It is a brilliantly constructed defense mechanism and a highly covert strategy for interpersonal control.
Wait, control. How does being an empath give them control?
Well, by claiming the label of empath or leaning heavily into an identity built around extreme emotional fragility, they effectively demand a safe space from everyone around them.
Oh, I see. They set the rules of engagement.
Exactly. Think about the mechanics of this. They are essentially communicating, I am so sensitive, so attuned, and so deeply rooted by the world that you must cater to my emotional needs at all times.
Right, and if you offer any feedback, any criticism, or try to set any boundaries,
then you are not just disagreeing with them, you are actively abusing their sensitive nature.
wow. It is a velvet trap. It forces every single person in their orbit to constantly walk on eggshells.
It really does. It's an incredibly potent form of manipulation.
It is, because instead of overt boasting, like saying, I am the smartest person in this room, the covert narcissist weaponizes self-deprecation.
They use their supposed weaknesses as a weapon.
Yeah, they utilize the sob story and the victim mentality. They will relentlessly position themselves as the one who has been wronged, the one who is perpetually overlooked by their boss, or the one who gives so much but is uniquely suffering.
And that achieves a very specific interpersonal dynamic.
Right, because they fish for reassurance by preemptively putting themselves down, which engineers a social dynamic where you, the listener, are basically forced to build them back up.
And that dynamic achieves the exact same psychological goal as the grandiose narcissist bragging about a new sports car.
It gets them the supply.
Yes, it secures what clinicians call narcissistic supply. That means the attention, validation, and emotional focus of others.
So the overt narcissist demands the spotlight by claiming to be the absolute best.
And the covert narcissist steals that exact same spotlight by claiming to be the most broken.
Wow, the end result is identical. The gravitational pull of the entire room is centered entirely on them and their needs?
Absolutely. The room still revolves around them, just for a different stated reason.
Okay, wait, I'm stuck on something here. I need to push back on this concept of grandiosity.
Okay.
If this person supposedly hates themselves so much, and they are constantly playing the victim and hiding in the corner at parties, where is the grandiosity in that?
It's a great question.
Like, it sounds like they just have cripplingly low self-esteem. If an overt narcissist is a peacock strutting around showing off its feathers, the covert narcissist sounds like a wounded bird. How on earth is a wounded bird grandiose?
That is the pivotal question. And to answer it, we have to peel back the behavioral layer and move one level deeper into the psychological engine.
Okay, let's go deeper.
In that same RNPD Reddit thread, a user named StormBlessed1by1 brings up a startling analogy to explain this internal reality.
I remember this one.
They describe it as being the small puppy in a big universe. The grandiosity of the covert narcissist is not absent, it is inverted.
Inverted grandiosity. That phrase just explains so much.
Doesn't it? They aren't the richest, the smartest, or the most physically attractive person in the world. Instead, they are the most misunderstood.
Right. They are the most unfairly treated by society.
Exactly. Their psychological suffering is the most unique, profound, and complex suffering to ever exist in human history.
Oh, wow. So the grandiosity lies in the deeply held, unshakable conviction that their pain makes them inherently special.
Yes. And consequently, because their victimhood is so unique, the world owes them an enormous unpayable debt for it.
Wow. So their suffering literally becomes their crown.
It does. It elevates them above everyone else.
If you were listening to this and realizing that the person in your life who constantly drains your energy isn't just having a hard time, but is actually holding you hostage with their misery, this is the mechanism. They are weaponizing their vulnerability.
Another Reddit user, GreedyAd2198, articulates this perfectly from the inside.
What did they say?
They admit that even if they think they are the bad one in a situation, they are the bad one. They are still the main character.
Ah, so it's still all about them.
Exactly. They are still completely different and separate from everyone else. The profound entitlement is absolutely still there. It is just channeled through the lens of vulnerability.
Because they genuinely believe they are entitled to endless patience, endless emotional labor from their partner, and total immunity from all accountability, simply because of how fragile they are.
Right, because they're just too damaged to be held to normal human standards.
Okay, so now that we know the wounded bird routine is actually a highly effective disguise for inverted grandiosity, we really have to look beneath that.
But we have to find the core.
Yeah, what is that grandiosity protecting them from? What is at the absolute emotional core of this disorder? Why would a human mind build this elaborate, lifelong maze of victimhood?
Well, to understand the emotional core, we turn to schema therapy, specifically the foundational work developed by Dr. Jeffrey Young.
Schema therapy is so good for breaking this down.
It really is. In the schema model, grandiose and covert narcissism are not viewed as two entirely different psychiatric disorders.
Right, like we said earlier.
They are viewed as two different coping styles that are deployed to cover up the exact same core wound. And that wound is toxic, overwhelming shame.
The two faces of the same shame.
Exactly. Deep in the unconscious architecture of every single narcissist is what schema therapy calls the vulnerable child mode.
And this child mode is completely dominated by a massive defectiveness or shame schema, right?
Yes. And we need to be clear, this is not just feeling a little insecure about a bad haircut.
No, it's way deeper.
This is a deep, agonizing, cellular conviction that they are fundamentally flawed, inherently unlovable, and irrevocably inadequate.
That sounds absolutely terrifying to live with.
It is psychological torture. The grandiose narcissist deals with this terrifying schema by overcompensating.
Right. They act as if superiority and perfection are objective truths to aggressively fight the shame. They build this impenetrable fortress of arrogance.
But the covert narcissist does the opposite. They don't fight it.
No, the covert narcissist surrenders to the schema, or they aggressively avoid it.
Yes, they preemptively collapse into the wounded, victimized position. They withdraw from any situation, any challenge, or any relationship dynamic that might potentially expose their underlying defectiveness.
Because their self-esteem is entirely contingent on external validation.
Entirely. So any criticism, even a mild, helpful suggestion from a loving partner, is processed by their brain as an absolute existential threat to their survival.
Which perfectly explains the extreme, almost baffling emotional reactivity you see in these individuals.
It makes complete sense once you see the schema.
It does. We have a compelling 2023 study in our sources looking at pathological narcissism and emotional responses to social rejection.
That study was incredibly telling.
It really was. It found that while grandiose narcissists will deactivate, meaning they just dismiss the rejection with pure arrogance, thinking, you're all idiots anyway, I didn't want to be in your club.
Right, they just cut off the emotional response entirely.
Yeah, but vulnerable narcissists physically and psychologically cannot do that. When they face rejection, a perceived slight, or an ego threat, they experience intense, brewing negative emotions.
They are flooded.
They are completely flooded with severe shame, which quickly morphs into quiet, burning, vindictive anger.
And because they are covert and their entire identity relies on being the innocent victim, they rarely explode in overt screaming rage.
Right, that would ruin the mask.
Exactly. So that hypersensitivity turns inward and sideways. It manifests as severe passive-aggressive behaviors, agonizingly long silent treatments, and deep, dark resentment.
They will punish you for making them feel flawed, but they do it in a way that allows them to maintain their pristine image as the deeply wounded, innocent party.
They make you feel crazy while they play the saint.
Yes. There's a brilliant clinical example in our sources from Dr. Anthony Mazzella that captures this perfectly.
The young man avoiding parties.
That's the one. He discusses a young male patient who chronically avoided social gatherings. This young man claimed he didn't want to go to parties because, everyone there is just getting wasted, doing drugs, and acting like idiots.
Which, on the surface, just sounds like a personal preference or a moral stance.
Right. But I love this example because it perfectly illustrates the fable of the sour grapes.
The Aesop fable. Walk us through how that maps onto the covert narcissist's mind.
Okay, so the fox in the fable jumps and jumps but can't reach the grapes on the vine. Because he cannot handle the failure, he walks away and decides to tell himself that the grapes are probably sour anyway, so he didn't really want them.
It's a classic defense against shame.
Exactly. So this young man, in the clinical example, cannot handle the extreme vulnerability of trying to fit in at a party.
Right.
The social terror, the possibility of being rejected, of looking awkward, of someone not finding him fascinating. It's literally too much for his fragile ego to bear.
The risk of exposure is too high.
So what does he do? He preemptively decides the party is beneath him. He uses a rigid posture of moral superiority to mask his profound social terror.
He tells himself he isn't excluded. He is choosing to abstain because he is intellectually and morally better than them.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, to the structural psychology of schema therapy, that young patient's behavior represents a starved or entirely non-existent healthy adult mode.
That is a crucial concept here, the healthy adult mode.
Right, because the healthy adult is the part of a mature human psyche that integrates our vulnerable, wounded child parts with the complex reality of the adult world.
It is the part of you that can pause and say, I feel incredibly insecure and anxious about this party, but I know my friends want me there, I know I'm a good person, and I can handle feeling a little awkward for an hour.
But the covert narcissist doesn't have that internal moderator.
They do not. Because that healthy adult mode never properly developed, the covert narcissist literally cannot metabolize feelings of shame, inadequacy, or embarrassment.
So they just have no way to process it.
None. They can't process it without either projecting those feelings violently outward onto someone else or collapsing entirely into a state of paralyzed victimhood.
They have absolutely no internal shock absorbers for the bumps and bruises of normal human interaction.
That's a great way to put it. No shock absorbers at all.
So if this healthy adult mode never developed, we have to travel back in time. We can't just look at the adult behavior. We have to find out why their psychological growth was stunted in this highly specific, highly destructive way.
We have to look at the genesis of the trauma.
Right. Where did this trauma originate?
Yeah.
How does a child become this?
To answer that, we have to go 5 layers deep into Margaret Mahler's psychoanalytic theory of separation individuation.
This is such a foundational theory.
This is the absolute bedrock of understanding personality disorders. Mahler posited that healthy psychological development requires an infant and toddler to undergo a highly complex, terrifying, and delicate process.
You have to separate from the mother.
Yes. They must gradually separate from their primary caregiver, moving from a state of total symbiotic fusion into an independent, separate individual. And they have to do this while maintaining a secure, stable sense of self.
And how's a toddler supposed to do that without being terrified? The world is huge, and they are tiny.
Well, that delicate process is entirely facilitated by the caregiver's emotional attunement. The caregiver must provide a holding environment.
So the caregiver is like the anchor.
Exactly. When the toddler ventures out to explore the world, what Mahler called the practicing subphase, they must be able to look back and see the mother smiling, encouraging them.
Right, giving them that silent permission to explore.
And when they get scared and run back, which is the rapprochement phase, the mother must be there to provide emotional refueling.
So the caregiver must accurately reflect and respond to the child's true, authentic emotions.
Yes, mirroring. If the child is sad, the mother validates the sadness. If the child is joyful, the mother shares the joy. This mirroring teaches the child, my internal reality is real, it is acceptable, and I am safe.
But with the covert narcissist, this separation individuation process is ruptured, isn't it?
Severely and catastrophically ruptured.
How does that happen?
It can happen through sheer emotional unavailability, severe neglect, or highly inconsistent, chaotic caregiving.
So the parent just isn't attuned at all.
Right. When the parent fails to provide that safe emotional mirroring, perhaps because the parent is depressed, narcissistic themselves, or simply absent, the child feels psychologically abandoned in the void.
They look back for emotional refueling, and there's a blank wall.
And they learn very rapidly that the world is incredibly unsafe for their true, vulnerable self.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Looking at the deep dive sources, covert narcissism isn't always born from classic, overt physical abuse or extreme neglect.
No, in fact, it often comes from something much more subtle.
Often it comes from a much more insidious trauma, which is conditional praise.
Yes, the fusion of the emotional deprivation schema with the unrelenting standard schema. This is incredibly common in the backgrounds of vulnerable narcissists.
Right. The child in this scenario is praised, but the praise is exclusively reserved for their achievements, their physical appearance, their intellect, or their ability to regulate the parent's emotions.
They become a trophy for the parent.
Or an emotional surrogate.
Right.
But their actual emotional interior, Their fear, their sadness, their normal childhood messiness is completely ignored, mocked, or punished.
Which sends a devastating message to the child.
It does. So the child internalizes a devastating lesson early on. Their authentic self is profoundly inadequate, repulsive, and unwanted.
They learn that they are only safe and they only receive anything resembling love if they construct and maintain a rigid, perfectly acceptable false self.
And this creates a profound bleeding attachment wound that never heals.
It scars them for life.
If you look at adult attachment theory, the research clearly and repeatedly shows that vulnerable narcissism is deeply tied to insecure attachment styles, specifically the preoccupied and fearful attachment styles.
Which means they are caught in an agonizing, endless loop.
Explain that loop because it's so frustrating for the partner to experience.
Well, with preoccupied attachment, they desperately, obsessively crave connection and validation from others to soothe their internal void.
They need people to survive.
Yes, but simultaneously with the fearful attachment component, they are absolutely terrified of the vulnerability that true connection requires.
So they desperately want to be loved, but they hold a core conviction that if anyone actually sees their true defective self beneath the mask, they will be violently discarded.
It is a constant, lifelong approach avoidance conflict. They pull you in, and the second you get close, they push you away in terror.
This raises an incredibly important question about human survival, though. Why did the child choose narcissism as the solution to this trauma?
Because we have to understand that, originally, narcissism is a brilliant, highly effective childhood survival mechanism.
It kept them alive.
It did. By rejecting their own desperate need for the cruel, conditional, or emotionally unavailable caregiver, and retreating inward into a private fantasy world of hidden specialness and inverted grandiosity, the child successfully protected their fragile mind from completely shattering.
They created a false self to take the hit.
Exactly. The tragedy, the immense heartbreaking tragedy of this disorder is that this childhood shield becomes an adult prison.
The false self kept them alive when they were 5 years old, but it absolutely prevents them from ever experiencing authentic love, intimacy, or peace as an adult.
It is a survival mechanism that vastly outlived its usefulness, and now it destroys everything it touches.
Man, and we've mapped the psychological trauma, the origins of the shame. But how does this specific trauma actually wire the brain?
The physical brain architecture is heavily impacted.
We have to look at the neurobehavioral intersection here, because the comorbidity data in our sources is absolutely fascinating. It shows how structural deficits in the brain can layer on top of and deeply compound these psychological wounds.
Let's look at the ADHD connection. This is a highly significant area of emerging clinical research.
Yeah, there is a 2024 study by Duarte and colleagues that looked at adults attending a specialist ADHD clinic.
And they were looking for personality disorder comorbidities, right?
Exactly. They found a 9.5% overlap, meaning nearly 1 in 10 of those patients with ADHD also met the strict diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder.
Almost 1 in 10. That is a massive overlap for a personality disorder.
It is, and the crucial illuminating detail of the study is this. The vulnerable and grandiose narcissistic traits were specifically tied to the hyperactivity and impulsivity components of ADHD, not the inattention component.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, what does this all mean for the person living with both? Why are hyperactivity and impulsivity specifically linked to the development of covert narcissism?
Well, think about the shared environmental and developmental risk factors. People with ADHD, especially those who go undiagnosed throughout childhood, experience a horrific amount of chronic failure, relentless criticism, and profound social rejection early in life.
Because of their impulsivity and hyperactivity, they are constantly told by teachers, parents, and peers that they are too much.
Right, that they are acting out, that they are lazy, or that they are chronically failing to meet their potential.
And this chronic daily environmental invalidation severely compounds the defectiveness and shame schema we discussed earlier.
The world is constantly reflecting back to them that they are broken.
It's like pouring cognitive gasoline on the trauma of conditional love.
It really is. And this brings up a concept that is highly prevalent in the ADHD community, but rarely talked about in conjunction with narcissism, which is rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD.
RSD is a huge piece of the puzzle here.
For those who don't know, RSD is an extreme, almost physical emotional sensitivity and agonizing pain triggered by the perception, real or imagined, that a person has been rejected, teased, or criticized by important people in their life.
And the neurological RSD seen in ADHD perfectly mirrors and exacerbates the extreme emotional dysregulation, the hypersensitivity, and the perceived victimhood of the covert narcissist.
So for someone dealing with both, their nervous system is structurally, neurologically wired to experience even mild social slights as overwhelming physical pain.
Yes. And their personality structure is psychologically organized to defend against that exact pain using narcissistic mechanisms.
Right, like blame shifting, playing the victim, and inverted grandiosity.
It's a perfect storm. The brain feels the rejection as a burn, and the personality disorder lashes out to punish the person holding the match.
But ADHD isn't the only comorbidity that sheds light on this machinery. The sources also dive deeply into what happens when covert narcissism overlaps with borderline personality disorder, or BPD.
The psychoanalyst Sam Vaknin's work on this intersection is absolutely wild.
It's so intense. He describes the horrific dynamics of what happens when these two disorders exist in the same person, or when a borderline individual dates a covert narcissist.
Vaknin describes this dynamic as essentially a battle between the vacuum and the wall.
The vacuum and the wall. Explain that.
The individual with borderline personality disorder seeks intimacy as a literal form of life-saving medicine. Because they lack a core identity, they use the other person to regulate their own chaotic internal environment.
They need intense, merged intimacy to survive. The absence of it feels like psychological annihilation and death.
But the covert narcissist views that exact same intimacy as a profound existential threat.
Why is intimacy a threat to them?
Because to the covert narcissist, intimacy means you are average or normal, and their entire survival depends on believing they are a special, unique victim. Intimacy requires vulnerability, which means lowering the drawbridge and exposing the deeply defective, unlovable true self to the other person.
Right. So if a person has both disorders, which Vaknin argues is frequently the case with covert narcissism, where BPD is the dominant visible disorder, masking the covert narcissism beneath it, you have an agonizing, never-ending internal war.
One part of the psyche is screaming for enmeshment to avoid abandonment, while the other part is screaming for distance to maintain superiority and avoid exposure.
Or, if a borderline individual is in a romantic relationship with a covert narcissist, you have the most toxic interpersonal dance imaginable.
It's like a magnet rapidly flipping its poles.
Yes. One person is desperately, frantically pulling for closeness, trying to merge identities to feel safe. And the moment they finally achieve that closeness, the covert narcissist feels their autonomy being smothered.
They feel their omnipotence threatened, their defectiveness about to be exposed, and they violently repel the partner.
It's an intimacy death spiral. They push and pull, idealize and devalue, until the relationship simply disintegrates under the sheer tension of the trauma bonds.
We have to realize, when looking at these neurobehavioral overlaps, that the dysregulation happening here isn't just about feeling sad or mad.
No, it's way deeper than normal emotions.
When a covert narcissist's fragile self-worth is threatened by intimacy or by a partner simply asking for emotional reciprocity, their total lack of an emotional vocabulary and their incredibly fragmented identity means they literally cannot metabolize the negative effect.
Their brain treats a social slight, or boundary, as a literal existential threat to their biological life.
Their amygdala is hijacking their brain, telling them they are about to die.
So we now see the terrifying internal storm. We have mapped the childhood trauma, the schema defectiveness, the toxic shame, the neurological dysregulation, and the approach avoidance conflict.
We have the whole internal picture.
But what happens when you try to actually love this person? What does it look like inside a marriage, a long-term partnership, or a family dynamic?
This is where it gets incredibly difficult.
We need to move into the devastating reality of interpersonal relationships with a covert narcissist, because this is where the theoretical psychology becomes deeply, painfully real for the people who love them. This is where the collateral damage spreads.
This brings us to a highly complex, crucial clinical concept in relational psychoanalysis known as the claustro-agoraphobic dilemma.
The claustro-agoraphobic dilemma. That sounds like being trapped in a tiny, suffocating room while simultaneously being terrified of stepping outdoors.
That is exactly what it feels like for them emotionally every single day of their lives.
That sounds exhausting.
It is the constant, rapid, agonizing oscillation between a fear of abandonment, which is the agoraphobia, the fear of the vast empty space of being alone, and a fear of engulfment.
Which is the claustrophobia, the fear of being trapped and smothered by intimacy.
Exactly. When their partner naturally creates distance, maybe they go to work or focus on a hobby or set a boundary, it immediately triggers the narcissist's attachment anxiety.
They feel the terror of abandonment. And crucially, they lose their narcissistic supply, the constant stream of validation they need to know they exist.
So the agoraphobia kicks in, they feel completely alone in the void.
So what do? They pull the partner back in, they use the sob story, they manufacture a sudden health crisis, they initiate a deep intellectual conversation, or they play the helpless victim.
Whatever it takes to hook the partner's empathy and drag them back into orbit.
Yes. They are masters at reeling the partner back in. But the moment the partner gets close, the moment genuine warmth, vulnerability, and intimacy are actually on the table, it triggers the opposite pole.
Their fear of engulfment, the claustrophobia kicks in. Closeness means their autonomy is being smothered.
Closeness means their hidden defectiveness is under a microscope and might be exposed.
And worst of all, closeness forces them to acknowledge that they actually need someone else.
And admitting they need someone completely shatters their delusion of self-sufficiency. It shatters their inverted grandiosity. If they need you, they aren't a special elevated being. They are just a human.
Exactly. True. Healthy emotional closeness requires acknowledging mutual dependency. I rely on you, you rely on me.
But the narcissist cannot tolerate dependency because in their childhood, depending on their caregiver, led to catastrophic emotional trauma and abandonment.
So, to regain control of the relationship, to push the partner back to a safe distance, and to restore their own feeling of omnipotent control, they engage in a behavior that Vaknin calls preemptive abandonment.
Preemptive abandonment. They abandon you before you can abandon them. They beat you to the punch.
Precisely. They push the partner away. They might ruin a special occasion like a birthday or anniversary with a sudden, inexplicable, sullen mood.
Or they pick a bizarre circular fight out of nowhere. Or they engage in blatant infidelity.
They actively destroy the intimacy so they can sit back in their fortress and tell themselves, she didn't reject me because I'm inherently flawed. I discarded her because I am superior and she was too demanding.
Wow. It is a narrative they spin to survive.
It is utterly transactional.
Once they have secured the partner, once they know the partner is deeply in love with them and committed, they actually begin to punish the partner for making them feel vulnerable and dependent.
They use passive aggression, withholding of physical affection, and days-long silent treatments to maintain a superior, untouchable, icy distance.
So what does this all mean for the partner? If you are listening to this and wondering why your partner seems so incredibly loving in the beginning and now treats you with a quiet, simmering contempt for absolutely no reason, this is the dynamic.
It is incredibly disorienting for the partner.
It sounds like they are setting their own house on fire just to prove to themselves that they control the thermostat. They destroy the very love they desperately crave just to ensure they're the ones pulling the strings.
That is a highly accurate, vivid analogy. They would rather rule over ashes than be an equal partner in a healthy home.
It's so tragic.
And to understand how they can systematically do this to someone they supposedly love, we have to look at a deeply unconscious, highly destructive defense mechanism called projective identification.
Okay, we are going deep into layer 5 now. This is a heavy psychoanalytic concept. Unpack projective identification for us, because this is where the partner starts to feel like they are losing their mind.
We all know about simple projection, where I feel angry, but I accuse you of being angry. Projective identification goes a massive step further.
How so?
When the covert narcissist is filled with unmanageable, toxic feelings of worthlessness, anxiety, and shame feelings, their fragile psyche literally cannot process without collapsing. They unconsciously project those feelings into their partner.
Wait, into the partner, not just onto them like a movie screen.
Into them. They engage in such highly subtle, crazy-making, manipulative, and gaslighting behaviors that they actually induce those exact emotions in the partner.
That is horrifying.
The partner actually begins to feel the exact anxiety, worthlessness, confusion, and out-of-control rage that the narcissist is internally trying to escape.
By provoking the partner into acting crazy, desperate, or angry, the narcissist can look at the partner and say, look how unstable you are. Look how emotional you are. Thank God I am so calm and rational.
Yes. By making the partner feel isolated and desperate, the narcissist suddenly feels grounded, calm, and morally superior.
They literally outsource their internal trauma to you. They force you to carry their toxic shame so they don't have to feel it.
That is absolutely correct. They use the partner's nervous system as an emotional dumping ground to regulate their own.
A partner becomes the designated container for the narcissist's mental illness.
It is a devastating form of abuse.
But what happens if the partner refuses to carry it anymore? What if the covert narcissist spends their whole life managing this fragile distance, manipulating the thermostat, outsourcing their shame, and then one day they are finally cornered?
When the mask finally slips.
Yeah. They are exposed by undeniable proof of a lie, or held strictly accountable by a partner who sets an ironclad boundary and the mask slips entirely. What happens then?
Then you witness one of the most terrifying psychological events in clinical observation. It is a phenomenon known as narcissistic mortification.
Mortification,
Okay.
like to be mortified, just really, really embarrassed.
Oh, it is infinitely more severe than embarrassment. It is not just a temper tantrum or feeling humiliated. It is a catastrophic structural collapse of the entire false self.
A total collapse.
When the covert defense mechanisms completely fail, when they absolutely cannot play the victim, when they cannot gaslight their way out of a contradiction, when the reality of their actions is held inescapably to their face, they are plunged instantly back into the unmirrored, raw, bleeding trauma of the vulnerable, true child self.
So they regress entirely.
It is a state of existential terror, profound psychological agony, and total identity disintegration. They feel as though they are psychologically dying.
It's like the psychological equivalent of being flayed alive. All the armor is stripped off at once.
Yes, it is unbearable psychic pain. And to escape this psychological death, to survive the mortification and instantly rebuild the false self, they will pivot with breathtaking speed and viciousness to a strategy known as DARVO.
DARVO.
Yeah.
Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender.
Exactly. This is the moment where the quiet, shy, sensitive, empathic, covert narcissist suddenly shifts into severe, ruthless hostility.
They turn on you completely.
They engage in psychological splitting, where you suddenly go from being their idealized savior to being an absolute irredeemable monster. They initiate retaliatory devaluation.
The victim narrative is weaponized to an extreme, almost sociopathic degree. They will launch vicious smear campaigns, turn mutual friends and family members against you, and genuinely believe that you are the abuser who has destroyed their life.
This raises an incredibly disturbing question about reality itself, doesn't it?
It really does, because the sources heavily emphasize that the covert narcissist's cognitive dissonance allows them to genuinely rewrite history in their own mind.
They alter their own reality.
I want to make sure you, the listener, get this. They aren't always sitting there twirling a mustache, consciously plotting to lie to the police or their therapist. Their brain literally alters their memory of events to ensure they remain the blameless victim.
Because remembering their own abusive, cruel actions would trigger another mortification.
That is the most dangerous, intractable part of this disorder. Their psychological survival, their very ability to function, depends entirely on their delusion of victimhood remaining perfectly intact.
If they accept reality, they collapse. Therefore, reality must be destroyed.
It is so terrifying for the partner on the receiving end. The cognitive dissonance it creates in the victim is profound. It's like playing a deeply complex game of chess with someone for years, and the very moment you finally say checkmate, they don't just concede.
No, they change the rules entirely.
They flip the board over, set the pieces on fire, pull the fire alarm, and then call the police to hysterically report that you just assaulted them with a burning chessboard.
And they will pass a lie detector test while making that report, because in their mortified, reconstructed reality, your attempt to hold them accountable was an act of unforgivable violence against their fragile soul.
It's just mind-bending to deal with.
It is. And this brings us to a very sobering, highly debated reality about treatment, prognosis, and healing. This is discussed extensively in both the clinical literature and in the underground support groups for survivors of covert narcissistic abuse.
Right, the concept of the illusion of healing. We see this detailed in the sources, drawing a very apt parallel to the concept of a dry drunk in addiction recovery circles.
A dry drunk is a term for someone who has successfully stopped consuming alcohol, but has done absolutely none of the underlying emotional, psychological, or spiritual work required for true recovery.
So they are still sick, just sober.
They are sober in their outward behavior, but their mind, their deeply held resentments, their entitlement, and their toxic coping mechanisms remain exactly the same. They are still an addict, they just aren't actively drinking.
And the clinical sources apply this directly to the covert narcissist who enters therapy.
It's a very dangerous phase.
Sometimes a covert narcissist will agree to go to couples counseling or individual therapy, usually because they are terrified the partner is finally leaving and they're about to lose their primary source of narcissistic supply.
They only go when their supply is threatened.
Right. And because covert narcissists are often highly intelligent and observant, they can quickly learn the vocabulary of therapy. They learn therapy speak.
They weaponize the language of healing.
They learn to identify and stop the most visible, egregious behaviors. They stop the overt stonewalling. They curb the obvious passive aggression. They stop the blatant guilt tripping.
But stopping the behavior does not mean the covert narcissist is healed. Not by a long shot.
What are they actually doing then?
If they learn to merely mimic good, healthy behavior in the therapist's office without ever addressing the core attachment wounds, the profound toxic shame, the defectiveness schema, and the absolute terror of true vulnerability, they are simply engaging in high-level behavior management.
The emotional void at their core remains entirely unfilled.
They're just performing a new, slightly more sophisticated version of the false self to appease the therapist, maintain their victim status, and keep the partner trapped in the relationship.
Because to actually genuinely heal, they would have to willingly walk into the fire of mortification. They would have to voluntarily dismantle the false self, meet that terrified, abandoned, shame-filled inner child, process a lifetime of suppressed trauma, and build a healthy adult mode entirely from scratch.
And for most individuals with this personality structure, that process is simply too painful, too terrifying, and too destabilizing to ever endure.
It requires a level of immense courage, brutal self-honesty, and radical vulnerability that their entire personality structure was specifically neurologically designed in childhood to prevent.
You are asking a fortress to dismantle its own walls while it believes it is under constant siege.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and look back at the massive, complex journey we've just taken into the depths of the human psyche. We started at the surface, peeling off the deceptive, shy, sensitive, misunderstood empath mask to reveal the rigid, inverted grandiosity operating underneath.
We traveled down through the intense hypersensitivity and the core toxic shame of the defectiveness schema.
We went all the way back in time to the childhood trauma of conditional love, emotional deprivation, and the catastrophic rupture of the separation individuation process.
We looked at how that chronic invalidation literally wires the brain, overlapping with ADHD impulsivity, rejection sensitivity, and the borderline desperation for intimacy.
We explored the devastating, chaotic, claustro-agoraphobic dilemma that destroys their interpersonal relationships through preemptive abandonment and the deeply insidious mechanism of projective identification.
And finally, we witnessed the terrifying, destructive collapse of narcissistic mortification and the reality-warping retaliation of Darvo.
We have meticulously mapped the machinery of this disorder, traveling from the most superficial outward behavior all the way down to the deepest, most unconscious evolutionary drive for psychological survival.
We have seen not just what they do, but why they cannot survive without doing it.
And tracing this entire map leaves us with a deeply provocative, almost haunting thought, something that wasn't explicitly stated in the clinical texts, but echoes through every single study, theory, and Reddit post we've discussed today.
It's a very heavy realization.
If a covert narcissist's entire personality, their intellect, their self-deprecating humor, their claims of unique victimhood, their professed empathy, and their shifting values is actually just a traumatized, highly sophisticated defense mechanism built solely to survive a childhood void.
Then when you fall in love with them, who are you actually loving?
Are you loving a real integrated person? Or are you simply loving a highly sophisticated survival strategy wearing a human face?
And more importantly, if you are the partner trying to save them, can you ever truly heal a person who believes on a deep neurobiological level that letting you in is a fate worse than death?
The wounded bird you are sacrificing your life to save might just be a mirage hiding a labyrinth of mirrors. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the hidden machinery of the human mind. If this resonated with you, if it explained a dynamic you've been trapped in, take this knowledge and use it. Stay fiercely curious, rigidly protect your boundaries, and always look beneath the surface.